Attention, all curious minds, innovators, and trendsetters. It's time to pause, lean in, and get ready for an extraordinary journey as we dive deep into the fascinating realms of life, technology, entertainment, and business. Let's explore, learn, and grow together. Brace yourselves, for the next thrilling episodes of Hipther Talks is about to take off. Counting down from 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here we go.
Hi everyone, Zoltan here. We're back again with Hipther Talks, and we're sticking to the interesting topic of artificial intelligence, but also sticking in the iGaming industry. And it's a pleasure to have with us Paula Murphy, Business Development Manager at Mindway AI. Hi Paula, nice to have you here.
Hey Zoltan, nice to be here. How you doing?
All good. Finally, we get to have you on our podcast as well.
Happy to be here. Absolutely.
All right, so we have this tradition here on Hipther Talks that we like to give the guest the chance to say a few words about themselves in their own words, so we don't read out any bios. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not sure what to say. So hello, everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Paula Murphy. I'm Business Development Manager for Mindway AI. So yeah, we are going to be talking quite a lot about AI today because that's what we do. But my personal background is kind of, I would say, rooted in compliance and player protection. Obviously at Mindway, my role is a commercial one, and my job is to look after the customers, to network, and to bring new customers and partners on board. But in a previous life, I ran my own business that was kind of specialized information for the compliance and player protection community. And before that, I was one of the managing directors at the Wilmington Group. So Wilmington are basically the parent organization of the International Compliance Association. So whilst that's not the division I was looking after their legal division. There was a lot of compliance involved in that as well. So I'll try and make it as rock and roll as possible for you today.
All right, so guys, Paula has been joining our conferences for 3 years now, but I did not know this lengthy bio, by the way.
Are you still awake, Zoltan?
Yes, I am. So let's talk about AI and about AI with a human touch, because you guys at Mindway AI emphasize on balance between AI and the human touch, the human expertise. So could you share how this philosophy shapes your approach to responsible gambling and how it impacts the effectiveness and of interventions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think anybody who's ever heard me speak at one of your conferences would have heard the words, it brings together AI, artificial intelligence, and HI, human intelligence. So it's kind of the crux of what we do at Mindway AI. We basically train the algorithm to replicate expert human decision making. And when I say experts, I mean sort of psychologists that have worked for many, many years in research and also really crucially in the clinical side of working with people that have experienced gambling related harm. So what we actually do is we take the spin level data from the operator and we get them to identify behavioral patterns within that data. And I know we're going to delve a lot deeper into how that works and what that's about as we go on. But what we then do is train the algorithm to replicate that decision making on scale. So it's built around human insights and human intelligence. And actually the value, you ask about how does this value player protection? Well, we believe very strongly that this is the best way to build context into what we're looking at, because players are not all equal. Just looking at, does this behavior exist? Yes, no, it's not enough. You've got to have context. You've got to understand what are the drivers for the behavior and how does this behavior interact with other behaviors that we're seeing, which is why the human approach is so critical.
All right. So we are going to definitely talk about Gen Z and gambling as well, because this is a topic that is interesting.
Is this because you think I'm Gen Z, Zoltan? Or?
Yes, it is.
I love you very much.
Yesterday I did a podcast about sports and veganism, and you know that there is this type of non-alcoholic wine, non-alcoholic gin, now whiskey, but it's all just sugar based, and yesterday I just found out that they are going to start doing these non-alcoholic wines with mushrooms to give a psychedelic effect. So basically you get tipsy from it without consuming any alcohol. So Gen Z is probably going to eat that up if they don't like gambling. As it turns
Interesting.
out, they don't drink that much, so they don't drink that much alcohol. So it's tough that at every conference there's this pickle that everybody is trying to attract the Gen Z into the gambling industry, and it's kind of unsuccessful, as in my opinion. But they do start playing and might develop some habits to gamble a lot. So they have been identified as a unique demographic with different gambling behaviors and values as the traditional gamblers do. So, what challenges and opportunities do operators face when protecting this tech-savvy, fast-paced generation?
Yeah, this is a huge question, and in my opinion, a really, really interesting one. So yes, Gen Z, we see different drivers. So we see social drivers being much more of a thing for them. We see that the way that they interact with gambling products being completely different. And actually, this is sort of cemented as well by the fact that most of the research that exists in this space is not looking at those younger players. It's been done looking at players from older generations. So this is something that we're all sort of working on. We at Mindway, we've got a really broad range of customer bases that target lots and lots of different demographics, I would say, but we do work with some operators who their demographic would definitely be considered much younger, and it's been something we've been looking at in a lot of detail with them. To build in that different understanding. And I think for me, it's all about that data-driven approach of, number one, understanding who it is that we're working with, and number two, what kind of considerations and controls do we want to put around this audience. We also know, on top of that a lot of regulators ask us to put additional attention to the under 25s. So you've kind of got this regulatory driver, you've got the reality of the situation that these people don't gamble in the same way as you would necessarily expect or historically we've seen. And then you've also got this idea of actually wanting to create a sustainable business for the future. So this is your future audience. So it's really important that you start to understand the differences with those player behaviors. So yeah, I think what I would say, and talking to our psychologists about it, when somebody reaches the point at which they are exhibiting very, very clear signs of gambling related harm, those signs are going to be the same, right? But we're not interested in just picking up players that have reached severe sort of high levels of problem gambling. What we're interested in doing is early interaction, early intervention, understanding behaviors before they reach that kind of point, and being able to identify people who are showing early signs. Now, one of the things that is quite unique to Gen Z is they're not that bothered about win or loss as well. So that traditional emphasis on financial markers is not something that's necessarily going to resonate with this generation. So what we have to do is say, okay, what does drive these people? What are they interested in? And a lot of the huge sort of, I guess, areas we need to focus on are, as we said earlier, the social elements of gaming and just being able to target and understand those different behaviors. So with the approach that we talked about earlier, where we have human psychologists that are actually assessing and looking at the data, one of the things we actually ask them to do is to pay concern to who this person is, not in terms of, oh, it's Zoltan and he lives at number 1 Hipther Road, but in terms of, well, it's a male of this age, they're based in this jurisdiction, and have a bit of an understanding of what you can expect from that individual, if that makes sense. So any understandings that we have around the different behaviors of younger audiences, can then intrinsically be built into the algorithm. So that's one bit of it on the detection. The next bit is how you interact and manage these people. So what we've actually done is you can set up different groups within the I guess the case management side of things, so that you can set different rules around these different groups. So what we would do is we'd set a sort of 18 to 25 group up. They would have very, very different triggers than somebody who sits in a different group. So you'd still get the same risk score. You still see actually this person's behaviors become quite problematic, but you're going to get that trigger at a different point in time and for a different reason. So it's all about kind of personalization, understanding the different behaviors, understanding what makes these people tick. And I think the other really important thing to say on this is, obviously at Mindway, we come from a neuroscience background. We were founded by a guy called Professor Kim Morrison, who is a professor of neuroscience. Now, neuroscience tells us that the human brain is not fully developed until around about the age of 25. And that's specifically around the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the bit of the brain that deals with impulsivity and decision making. So it makes sense that regulators want us to put extra controls around these players, but we have to go further. Again, we can't just say we're going to put extra controls. We need more research. We need more understanding. We need more people in our organizations that fall into that age demographic, so that, you know, everybody knows diversity drives innovation, innovation drives diversity, and it's a loop. Well, let's talk to people in that demographic. Let's get their views. Let's see what their experience is of gambling. I think to say Gen Z don't gamble is not correct. I have a daughter who's at university at the moment, and I know that most of actually the guys that she knows there gamble a lot. They've been, you know, on a house trip out to the races. They do quite a lot of sports betting. And I know we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the sort of newer products that we see coming through. This is a big thing for Gen Z as well. So it's all about being mindful of it, working with our operators who are working with that customer base and making sure we've got input coming in from that generation as well. And also there's loads of sort of PhD students that are researching this field who fit into that demographic. Engage with them, find out what they know, learn about their studies, and then deploy it into the work that we do.
All right, but be careful when identifying them and notifying them, because this is the snowflake generation, and they might it might be easy to approach them with responsible gambling and tell them, okay, you reach this limit, you might have a problem, and they get scared and they don't gamble anytime soon.
So you don't, but that's not how you would approach them. And it's about understanding how different people want to be approached. So I'm of a generation where I would much rather somebody picked up a phone and had a conversation with me. These guys would rather talk to a chatbot often. You know, they don't want to engage with humans. So it's about making sure that your intervention strategy, not only content-wise, matches up with who it is that you're talking to, but also the method of delivery as well. So that, again, that is a huge piece of it. And again, I don't think you should contact anybody and say you've got a huge problem. You should have had a dialogue with them much, much earlier down the line to avoid them getting to that place where they've got a problem. And on the upside, one of the things that Gen Z do care about is doing business with organizations that share their kind of moral compass and their moral code. So in terms of the protection element of it, it's something they will be more bought into if it's the culture from day dot. Nobody will be bought in if all of a sudden you're getting a bang with shutting down your account.
Yeah, send them an emoji.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So when I was doing the research for this podcast, I found an article where you've likened Mindway AI's technology to a seatbelt for gambling. I don't recall exactly where I found this article, but it was very interesting. So how does this analogy reflect the balance between enhancing player safety while also preserving the entertainment value of gaming?
Yeah, absolutely. So I ask you, Zoltan, does putting a seatbelt on spoil your enjoyment of being in a car?
No.
Exactly. And that's the point. I mean, I am somebody that believes very strongly that gambling is for entertainment. I think people should be allowed to have the freedoms to enjoy whatever it is that they do for entertainment. So I think that crucially is really, really important. I think the other key thing to talk about here is whenever we look at prevalence, and we look at sort of the distribution of risk in any operator database, what we see is a very, very small minority that sit in that high risk space. And what we're doing is we are trying to prevent other people from reaching that, just in the same way that the seatbelt prevents you from going through the windscreen if you were so unlucky as to sort of crash your car. So for me, and I know you and I have talked about this a lot, I don't believe in the push-pull of compliance versus commercial. I believe it's all part of the same equation. And I believe that actually, if you're getting this right and you're putting the right controls around, then you can keep the regulator happy. You can keep your players happy, which keeps them playing with you for longer. And you can obviously then deliver the financial results and the entertainment and the products for entertainment that you require. I think if you've got the seatbelt in place and you know, for example, that you've got a game that might be sort of slightly higher volatility, well, that's fine because you can track the players that prefer that game. You can put extra controls around those players. The seatbelt is there to protect them, not to stop them. We're not doing player prevention. We're doing player protection. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. All right. So we all know that the regulations are becoming stricter now. It might be in some case due to politics, not necessarily for the sake of the player protection. We actually seen this case in our country where it has been a campaign for governmental elections. The player protecting was taken so high that they actually and they somehow managed to squeeze in a law that for the land-based gambling industry, if the town is smaller than 15,000 people, then you cannot have a casino in there. Wow. But yeah, and
Okay,
that wasn't about really player protection. So like I said, with regulation becoming stricter and but also the customer expectations are shifting, how has the role of player protection evolved, and where do you see it heading in the next 5 years?
Oh my goodness, this is a huge question. And how much do you want me to get on my soapbox on this?
Yeah, usually these questions which end that in the next 5 years are always tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so regulation and gambling regulation. I think some regulators do it really well and are quite sort of sensible about what regulation they and what requirements they put in place. I think there are other regulations. I'm not going to name names or sort of point out certain jurisdictions, but there are other regulatory requirements in some jurisdictions that, from my point of view, as somebody who's worked in safer gambling for the last 8 years, actually are counterproductive and they don't make sense. So something like you suggested there, well, you can't have the casino in the smaller town. Well, that then means that this person's got to travel to go to the casino. It means they're going to make a bigger night out of it. It means that you lose the element of the guys in the casino knowing this person, understanding their observational factors that they can see, understanding who they are, being able to come up to them and say, "Hey, Zoltan, how's it going? We've not seen you for a while. Are you still having fun here?" Because all of a sudden they become more anonymous because they're having to travel to pursue the entertainment. So personally, I feel that there's issue with that kind of regulation. When we look at online regulation and we see there are certain jurisdictions that are putting like sort of concrete thresholds in place, that concerns me. It worries me because they're arbitrary. There is no research to show that at this level at spend, somebody is at more sort of risk than they would have been spending a euro or a dollar or a pound less than that and not triggering that threshold. What we want to do is we want to understand the full behavioral picture of what's going on with people. And actually, sometimes these thresholds are counterproductive to that. And what you end up with is safer gambling teams chasing after a lot of people who are perfectly fine, and the people who are not perfectly fine falling through the cracks. So that concerns me. The drive to the black market concerns me, and we see channelization in a lot of jurisdictions being a huge problem. It's something we've talked about year in, year out, and we continue to talk about. And we know that some of these sort of regulatory requirements are part of what's driving that. I've seen talks from people who talk about what the most common searches on Google in certain jurisdictions are, and it's clearly looking for casinos that are on the black or grey market, right? So these are huge issues, and this is why regulators need, in my view, to work with the industry and with other stakeholders to get this right. I also think that we have an opportunity as an industry to show that we can get this right, and we can understand our players and put protection of our players at the center of what we do. So I guess I'm framing my answer with that. The other bit you say about the political side of things, yeah, I agree. You're talking to someone who's based in the UK. It's a political hot potato, and it's a very emotive subject as well. And a lot of the voices that sort of come across from, I guess, the anti-gambling side of things, they've experienced very, very significant personal trauma. And as a result of that, obviously it's going to be emotive, which makes it in some ways very tricky to put a logical argument forward. So yeah, we exist in this sort of hurricane of all of this going on. My personal view of what I see with the customers that we work with is that we work with a lot of people who really, really care about players, who really, really want to see players looked after, and who work very hard to understand the research that's available, the technology that's available, and the best practice to really keep their players in that safe space. Now, that never gets reported on. You're never ever going to see a newspaper story that talks about gambling operator has these amazing controls in place, because it doesn't sell the news, does it? Where do I think it's going to go in the future? I hope it's going to go in the direction that acknowledges that, and that is liberal around people being able to choose their own pastimes, and sort of moving away from any kind of nanny state environment. I hope that the sort of capabilities of technology will be taken into consideration. And I am quietly confident that I think that will be the case. There's a number of different regulators that we're in dialogue with, either looking at using the solutions on a market-wide place or getting our input into where they're setting up legislation in sort of areas that are regulating at the moment, or even sort of very well-established existing regulators who are much more engaged now with the tech providers that exist within this space and wanting to understand more about what we do and how it works, so that that can inform the regulatory picture. So I'm quietly optimistic, but I completely understand where you're coming from when you talk about the question. And I would just encourage regulators, as well as the rest of the industry, to work with the experts, to work with the people who have done the research, to work with the people who understand the dynamics of this, and collaborate. We're always being told by regulators to collaborate. Come and join the party. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I have no filters, so this is probably applies to the UK, but different areas like Central and Eastern Europe is totally different. People there who are in the regulatory space are appointed politically. They don't know what they're doing, and sometimes avoid even going to conferences and meeting people because they don't understand what they are doing. They're basically there to sign papers. So that's the biggest problem we're facing. And that's why such strict rules are sometimes imposed on gamblers. But yeah, like I said, different regions.
I think it's about understanding the impact of those strict rules as well, though. When something is going to actually be counterproductive and lead to more gambling related harm, then that's obviously a huge problem. And that's why it's so important to interact with the people that do understand and that you know, and that have worked in this space. And that includes the lived experience voices as well. You know, we do quite a lot of work. We're partnered with the guys at Epic Global Solutions. Now, 50% of their business are people that have experienced gambling related harm in their past. And some of their stories, like, they blow you away. It's so interesting, the things they say. But I've sat with Craig, who's one of their guys, and he's said to me, there's absolutely no reason why my mum shouldn't be able to go down the bingo just because I couldn't control my gambling. And it's about getting the understanding and getting this right. I've also heard him say things along the lines of that actually when he looks at what he lost, the financial losses are the least thing on his mind. And yet we see everybody focusing on financial markers and financial considerations. He talks more about the loss of relationship and self-respect and, you know, these other things that are so much more important and so much harder to get back. So listen to these voices, listen to these people, work with them, work with the tech providers, get a holistic view, and then hopefully legislation can be more informed.
Yeah. And any state, like you mentioned, is focused on the financial side, so you can still pay taxes afterwards. So different regions and demographics.
A lot of tax comes from gambling as well, though, Zoltan.
Exactly.
Let's not forget this. And a lot of jobs are created as well.
Yes. So like different regions and demographics exhibit different gambling behavior. So how does Mindway AI adapt its technology to reflect cultural, generational, and regulatory differences across multiple jurisdictions? Because I know you guys are also in North America, in Europe. I don't know if you are also in Asia.
Yep. So we're operational in some 63 different international regulatory jurisdictions. So that's a lot of regulatory stuff to keep your head around. So yeah, I mean, obviously the regulatory picture is one part of it, and that's important. And our team are very, very good on staying on top of that regulation and making sure that it's built into the solution. And when we deploy and we configure for different operators, we're able to configure for the different, I guess, regulatory landscape. We're also very, very fortunate that we have Birgitte Sand on our board, and Birgitte is the ex-Director General of the Danish Regulatory Authority. So that gives us a lot of insight into how regulators think and how to frame that picture. But that's only one part of the equation, right? The other part is, as you quite rightly point out, the gambling behaviors and the cultural differences that you see in gambling behaviors. So Brazil, a huge market, regulating at the moment. What you would expect to see in Brazil is a lot of sort of lower level transactions, but a higher volume as compared to what you would see in Denmark or the UK, for example. So that needs to be taken into consideration. What the norm is in that territory needs to be taken into consideration. And the way we do this is it's what we talked about before. It's by working with the experts and making sure that they understand those localized gambling behaviors and the differences that you will see in those localized gambling behaviors. Same can be said actually for land-based versus online. You see very different behavior patterns. So we've done quite a lot of work with land-based operators this year. And what we've seen on land-based is a kind of a regular pattern of somebody who will go into the casino at certain times that clearly ties up with this is when this person's going home from work, or this is when which you don't necessarily see in the same way online. So it's understanding those different behaviors, hugely different deposit patterns as well, and being able to contextualize it, which you can do by deploying the expert assessment on it. Does that make sense?
Of course it does. All right, so I'm also interested about how does Mindway AI's AI-driven detection system enable operators to create personalized, safer gambling interventions, and what role does communication play in building this trust with the at-risk players? This is like an elevator pitch you can give now about Mindway.
Well, it's all about communicating with your players, right? So I think it has to start with the detection identifying the right players to be communicating with, although I personally believe there's an argument that you should be communicating with all players about safer gambling, just different messages depending on their sort of personalized behavior. And it's about understanding what those players, what their behavior is. And the way that we enable our operators to do that is by explainable and understandable AI. And what I mean by that is you would never get from Game Scanner, you would never get a situation where it says this player is at high risk, but you don't know why. So you get a very, very detailed AI-driven explanation of what the risk factors are. You can then drill further down into the AI-generated plots that show on a spin-by-spin basis what this player's been doing. So you can make a very in-depth assessment as to how best to speak to that player. And obviously, it makes no sense talking to somebody whose problem is time consumption about setting limits, right? Just in the same way, if somebody's got an issue around their spend, there's no point talking to them about time consumption. And that's a very sort of rudimental way of looking at it. But ultimately, that's what we do so that we can give indicators as to what you should talk to these players about. You can personalize it. And that way, the player actually sees a conversation where they can see themselves in it. Again, going back to the work we do with the guys at Epic, Dan Spencer, one of their guys there actually said to me that if he feels that if this kind of information had been available when he was experiencing his gambling problems, that it would have really helped him, because one of the huge issues is a disconnect between reality and what you're doing, and this sort of perception that everybody does this. So if you can be having a conversation that actually this is what we've observed, this is the behavior we've observed, this is how it compares to sort of standard behavior, whatever that is, but you know what I mean, kind of what everybody else does, then it opens the individual's eyes to that. If you can then couple that up with pointing them to tools and strategies that are going to help them manage their behavior, then even better still. So I always think, why is it so important and how does it contribute to player protection? Well, it's about giving the operator the information they need to make really good decisions. It's a data-driven approach, and there is no way you could crunch all of that data manually without the AI. So it just gives insight that you wouldn't get otherwise.
All right. So, Paula, have you heard about the Danish Problem Gambling Committee?
I haven't.
No. So basically, I'm just reading
Well, it
this now
depends
because
what about it.
no, I just received an email from them because Hipther was recommended to helping them host an online conference in January. So
right, okay.
I'm actually getting this out there now. We haven't accepted helping them, but yeah, we're already advertising them. So they are hosting a 2-hour online conference on problem gambling in January. So this is going to be very interesting.
Yeah.
Once we have more details, guys, we will definitely help them spread the word and organize this thing. So just so you know, you heard it here first. They even haven't advertised it yet, but this is
Even
an
I
insight.
heard it here first, and I work for a Danish organization.
Exactly. So she better spread the word. It's the 15th of January. All right. So let's get back to our podcast. So
Was that an
beyond
ad break?
it wasn't. So beyond identifying problem gamblers, like you said, how can AI improve the overall player experience? Because I don't know if you remember in Warsaw, a panel talked about the user experience when entering a gambling website, which is now kind of boring. It's the same thing we have since 10, 15 years now, only the logo and the colors change. So
Yeah.
how does AI improve the overall player experience from personalizing interaction and fostering loyalty while also trying to maintain a safe gaming environment?
Yeah, so I know the exact panel you're talking about, and it was before our panel, and I loved it. But I remember thinking when I was watching those guys, everything they've just said completely applies with a sort of risk safer gambling frame on it as well. Because what they're doing is basically deploying the same tactics, right? But just looking for different different elements and pointing to different pathways. And you've hit the nail on the head. It's about personalization. It's about taking the data and what we know about people and using that data to drive an experience that is unique to you, Zoltan. So when you log on, you're going to see a different load of products than I'm going to see. And these are going to be products that you're interested in. When you communicate with the operator, they're going to talk to you in a way that they know you're going to respond because they've got that understanding of who you are and how you like to sort of interact with them. So I think that, I think businesses are on the right track with that. And I think in terms of how do you join it up with player protection, it's literally about having your solution providers working together with one another and using the marketing expertise from people that are good at marketing, using the product expertise from people that are good at product, and using the safer gambling expertise from the people that understand player protection. I think it's cool. I like it. And I've got a number of different operators where we are talking in a much more holistic way about communication with individuals and players across the whole business with that lens of risk over it. And for me, that's really interesting because that's going to drive a really, really nice player experience. In terms of innovation and how do we move away from gambling being this generic experience? I do think it's happening. I know we're going to talk a bit about gamification later on. I do think there's a lot of innovation in our industry. And I do think AI is something that can help with that, like understanding how people digest certain games, understanding people's preferences, crunching any kind of data, getting the results back from that to drive into that innovation. It's got to be a good thing. But yeah, us guys that are looking after players, that should always be in the equation.
All right, but let's also talk about all that data and privacy, because I'm not a racist or anything. But I saw many news about ChatGPT's backlogs being examined by people in India, having access to all that databases and all those logs, which can be sold, of course. So AI in gambling also raises concerns about ethics and privacy because there's a lot of data that is collected just by one visitor or one player, not to mention their also their banking and their everything. Basically, now with biometrics being enabled on every phone, getting access to a website, using your deposit, giving your biometric there to just like having for that deposit on that account. It's all data. So how does Mindway AI address these issues while also ensuring transparency, fairness, and trust in its solutions?
Yeah, it's a terrifying world, right? I read an article this week that was talking about OpenAI's new model, and it was talking about how the model actually was showing signs of basically a deceptive nature. And when they tried to supersede it with another iteration, it actually replicated itself on the server and then pretended that it was the new model. So yeah, that blows my mind. I work in AI and that blows my mind. And this is very, very early days. And you have to think about all of that information that we have on people and the solutions, the technology that we're using. So we have obviously very, very stringent data protection controls in place. We're going through our ISO certification, and you do not work with some of the operators that we work with, the likes of Entain, Evoke, without going through their stringent data protection, and data security assessments before any contracts are signed and any work begins. So I think that's the first thing to say. I think the next bit that is really important here is actually the data that we work with is pseudo-anonymized. So we don't actually know who the customer is. We know the age, we know the gender, we know where they're based, and we know their gambling behavior, but I could never hook it back to this is Zoltan, right? I just have a unique identifier that is then mapped back at the operator's side so that they can obviously bring it into a particular player. So there's lots and lots of kind of quality checks, controls, certifications in place that we have to do because this is super important. There are then obviously people's concerns around privacy, which I get. And a lot of people don't want their data being tracked. I mean, I would say that where we sit on this is with what we're doing at Mindway AI, it's back to the seatbelt analogy. We're doing this to make sure they have a good experience, but in a safe way. So anybody who has massive concerns around their data being tracked for those purposes, I guess maybe that's somebody you might want to be having a conversation with from a safer gambling perspective anyway, and just checking in that they're all right and what their driver is for not wanting that. I think the other bit that is probably really important is that there is kind of regulation around any AI driven decision being something that you have to be able to challenge, and therefore it needs to be, going back again to my explainable and understandable, but that's hugely important, right? You can't just have machines making decisions and not knowing why those decisions have been made. And I guess the last thing I would say about that is keeping humans in the loop, so that actually we're checking, we're verifying, we're looking and doing quality control around what the AI is actually suggesting. So all of that exists, but I get it. I get why people are concerned about this. It's, in a lot of ways, it's like, the Matrix, the movies we used to watch back in the day sort of coming into fruition. I think it's really exciting, but I also understand why people would be concerned about it. And I think the other bit on this, the question I often get asked is the AI going to take over all our jobs? Are we all going to be made redundant?
No.
Well, I don't think so, but I actually got into a huge debate on stage about this at Sigma, and it was really good fun. But me and the other guy that were on the panel, we had sort of, I guess, we didn't have completely opposed opinions, but we disagreed. I feel very much that our roles are going to change, but there will always be roles. And I think there's a huge amount of kind of scaremongering that exists around AI. I think the data protection piece that you're asking about is one of them. I think this whole idea of the AI making us all redundant, and AI taking over the world is another. And we as humans have to keep control on all of those areas, keep the controls in place that we have at the moment, make sure that we have the right certifications, and keep on the ball with that and keep rolling it forward as we go.
Yeah, in terms of that, I saw a text somewhere that you don't have to be scared that AI is going to take over all the like coding jobs and stuff like that, because there's no client that will give you all the project he has in his mind correctly. So basically, he cannot prompt that correctly so that his project reflects. So they always need to fix something and keeping the discussion on privacy. I'm using a non-commercial internet browser, and in 1 year I blocked 1,182,000 trackers, and I saved 25 gigabytes of bandwidth. So yeah, given the fact that people don't use such things, there's a lot of data being shared across everything. So we don't only have to worry about that AI is going to steal your data.
People don't realize either that, the extent to which AI is around us. Like, people never think about, my Spotify daily mix. Well, how's that been generated? When I'm trying to park my car and not crash it, what are the parking sensors all about? All of this stuff, we seem to build into our day-to-day lives without actually understanding. That's all AI driven.
No, so basically a snowflake Gen Z would, if he would think about all these things, he would not go out from the house. So so there's also emerging trends like esports, loot boxes, and gamification. What role do you think that AI will play in ensuring responsible engagement with these new gambling formats, especially that the audience for this is the younger audience?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be the same as what we discussed earlier. I think understanding gambling behavior is at the core of this. And And that doesn't really matter what the product is. So esports, we already are sort of doing work in that field and in that space, and it's about understanding the differences that you're going to see in that vertical and making sure that the algorithm also understands those differences. Gamification I'm going to come back to because I think that's a really interesting area. What was the third bit you asked me about?
It was loot boxes.
Loot boxes. Oh, it's a prickly pear. Yeah, so kind of completely unregulated.
Yes.
Is it gaming? Is it gambling? I think there's a lot of research that needs to go into this. I personally believe that it is very much a gateway. And what we're doing is we're socializing people to have sort of what would historically be seen as gambling behaviors from a very early age because they're experiencing it through loot boxes. So it's the same though. My answer comes back to the same thing. If we understand those behaviors and we can track those behaviors, we can identify the people that are coming into a problem with them. How we will do that, I think, needs to go a little bit back to the regulatory situation, because I'm not going to lie to you, Zoltan, 99.9% of times that an operator starts a conversation with me, it starts with a regulatory driver. So until that's in place, these companies have no real reason to want to do anything about it. So, there's like a policy bit of work that needs to be done there, I guess. The final bit you asked me about is gamification. Now, this is an area I'm hugely interested in. I think the answer is the same, right? It's tracking behavior. Obviously, certainly when we're talking about free-to-play games, that you're not going to be tracking financial behavior, and this is where models like Mindway's come into its own, because the financial stuff is one very, very small part of what we do. Obviously, it's part of the equation, but when we're looking at the holistic behavior, that applies anyway. And I think I spoke a bit about this at one of your conferences. We actually have a gamified product ourselves. We always talk about Game Scanner, but we do have another product, Gamealize, which is basically a gamification of the self-test. So using this technology to enable people to basically have a view of their own level. And the reason that we developed this is that there was a kind of a feeling that questionnaire-based self-tests are sort of intrinsically problematic because they rely entirely on human beings self-reporting about their own behavior. Anyone who's ever been asked by the doctor how much exercise they do, well, not you, because I know you exercise a lot, but for me anyway, how much exercise have you done this week? You'd think I'm training for the Olympics. How many units of alcohol have you drank this week? You'd think I was teetotal.
Yeah.
Exactly. Humans do not self-report well. So what we actually did is we sort of developed this gamified self-test that actually asked the player to play a card game. And while they're playing the card game, we're analysing their play and the level of risk based on neuroscience principles of decision making. So this is a massive picture around gamification. I do think it's a huge area where we're seeing loads of innovation in product. We're seeing loads of innovation in customer acquisition, but also we're seeing innovation on safer gambling. So again, it's all of us working together, talking about what we're doing, understanding these products, creating a customer experience that is more fun and they're more likely to engage with, and taking it forward from there.
All right. So also about the early intervention part that you mentioned, which is critical in responsible gambling. So how do you guys ensure that your technology not only detects issues early, but also prevents harmful behaviors from escalating?
So this is about acting on the information that you're given. So what we're very strong on is detection. And identifying those behaviors early. And then the next step is actually acting on that. So I could sell Game Scanner into an operator and they could be sort of seeing the risk profile of all their players. That there is then a responsibility on them to deal with the information that they're being given. We do work very closely with our customers and we do configure, we have an action view that is part of the Game Scanner system. So what it actually does is it tees up all of the cases for the operator that has broken any rule, right? And that rule could be risk-based, or it could be threshold-based. It could anything that the operator wants to configure or that the regulation requires can be built into those rules. All those cases will then be teed up, and you can either action them through automation. So you can set certain rules of those that will go off, and those people will receive this email campaign, or those people will have a temporary account freeze while we look at what's going on with them, or those people will receive certain pop-ups at certain points in time, or you can set them for human to human interaction, depending on what it is that we've seen triggered. But that is a tool that is there to help the operators achieve their goals. It's fundamentally always going to be up to the operator to then action that, if that makes sense.
Of course it does. But I'm also interested about the judgment, because it's our world is increasingly driven by AI. So how do you ensure that the human judgment and empathy remain an integral part of the player protection process?
Okay, and it goes back to how we started. So we've done a nice story arc here. That is by using the humans to train the algorithm. That is by taking that expert human decision making, and that being what we replicate. So as well as judgment around what those gambling behaviors are and what we see problematic, I think I'm jumping ahead a question a little bit, but I'm very interested in, and I think in the future, we will get to a situation where we have experts, human experts, actually talking about recommendations for what that interaction should be or what that intervention should be, and then the algorithm being able to replicate those recommendations en masse. So if you train on a subset and you get recommendations from, so I mean, just imagine, right? We've got on our panel people that have worked for kind of 15 years in clinical practice with people that have experienced gambling related harm. If they're looking at, okay, what behavior do I see in this? And then as a last bit, we say, what would you advise to do? And then you can start training the algorithm to replicate that advice. Imagine where you would get to in enabling operators to deploy the right intervention strategies with that.
All right.
I'm excited about it. I think it's cool.
Yeah, it does. So let's jump back to Gen Z again, which, like we established, is driven by trends and social validation, of course. So how do you guys identify and address risk markers that go beyond financial behaviors and that may be focusing on their unique motivation for gambling?
Yeah, totally.
Because some might engage in gambling in this snowflake generation, or how I call it, just to be cool.
Yeah, and they do. They absolutely do. That is a thing. There was a lot of discussion actually at the Danish regulator put an event on last year where there was a lot of discussion around this. And it is different drivers, as we've talked about. I think it's actually one of the strengths of the Game Scanner product is that we don't focus entirely on financial markers. It's only one element of what we do. And I have seen players that sit in a high risk bracket, but their spend is relatively low. I have seen players that sit in a low risk bracket, but their spend would be considered high. And that's because you have to consider the full behavioral picture. So what we look at when we look at the data is a lot of different things. So we take obviously the spin level player data. We can also take data around interactions with safer gambling tools. We can take like lots and lots of different data sets to feed in to then get a holistic view of what is going on with that player that isn't just around what are they depositing, what is their spend. In fact, for me, more important than a deposit volume, like amount, is the pattern of those deposits. If you see somebody's deposit amount is quite high, but you see that it's stable and it follows a pattern that indicates control, that isn't such a concern. So long as you understand their source of wealth, source of funds, it's not going to be a massive problem. If somebody has a deposit pattern that is massively erratic, and you can see them playing to a point where they run out of funds and then topping up and topping up and topping up, and it being all over the place, and you can see the games they play getting scattered across lots of different games, and you can see that there's loss chasing going on there, that's a problem. Much more than somebody who is a net worth that they can afford to gamble at a more sort of higher level, I would say. So yeah, it again is about understanding that and building it in, and understanding the drivers to gamble. You're going to see a lot of that sort of interactive data as well, and you're going to understand how people are using those products, which products they're using, which products they prefer, what is the profile of other customers that prefer those products, what controls needs putting around the other customer, what is a lookalike, basically, who else prefers that product, do they fit into the same demographic? Okay, should we put a control around these players that do prefer that product that we don't necessarily have on some of our other games? Do you see what I mean?
Yes, of course I do. I would be definitely pointed out as a problematic player, because I would start playing as many of these games as possible because I get bored very quickly. So that would be a sign that I'm jumping from one game to the other trying to win.
But
so
that on its own wouldn't flag you. There's got to be a combination of these factors that we see in a holistic way, right? And also, even if something like that did flag you, and then you sort of received an email or got a pop-up, or even had a conversation with somebody about it, when they then understand this is your motivation, this is how you think, that can be fed back in, and that can be flagged and tagged in the system so that it then understands, okay, this is Zoltan, he's actually fine on this, it's just he likes that variety.
Yeah, he has ADD, and
Yes.
all right.
Welcome to my world.
Okay. So with the gambling industry spanning into diverse regulatory landscapes, how does Mindway AI handle varying compliance requirements while also maintaining a consistent player protection standard? Because there's a huge compliance need in terms that you need to satisfy in every jurisdiction.
Yeah, and I think I said to you earlier, we're in over 60 jurisdictions now. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of compliance needs. I would say that on the plus side, there seems to be kind of an overarching direction that most regulators are going in. So although there's variation, it's sort of moving in the same direction mainly. There are some outliers, but mainly. For us, it's about just making sure that our team are on top of it. We're understanding when new requirements are coming into place, and we are deploying and developing the system ahead of those requirements coming into place. Obviously, we prioritize jurisdictions that we have customers in, or we're deploying customers in. A huge example of that was in the Netherlands recently, where obviously there was some quite seismic requirements that were brought into place in the Netherlands, not least certain triggers needing to be responded to within an hour by the operator. We've already got a big customer base in the Netherlands who we had to update and make sure that they were compliant. We were also onboarding new operators that needed systems because of these regs coming in. So it was a big task, but we achieved it. And it literally is just keeping on top of that. It really is. And I think in terms of how do we balance that with the player protection side of things, well, I think we do a good job at Mindway in getting this right, in detecting the right players, and in understanding problem gambling and the nature of problem gambling. So the core of our product is always going to be giving you a true risk profile of each player. So regardless of where we are with the regulation, you're still going to have the Mindway risk score. Now, what you do with some of that information and what threshold triggers or whatever else needs putting on top of it, we can figure that into the solution, but you're still going to get that fundamental picture of this is your real risk distribution.
All right, so let's also talk about gamification, because it has been gaining traction in the gambling industry, and it's fun. I think the first time we spoke about gamification was 2014, 15, or something like that. But now it's really evolved. So how can operators leverage gamification responsibly without encouraging risky behaviors? And what role does AI play in achieving this balance?
So I'm going to go back to detection. I'm sorry, I keep repeating myself on this, but it's understanding those behaviors. But I think the other thing is thinking about gamification and how you can actually deploy that in your safer gambling strategies as well. There's quite a big focus on positive play at the moment. And I like that because it takes the safer gambling conversation away from the naughty step and it being somebody's been identified as a problem. So if you can use the same sort of gamification ideas and tactics around producing content for safer gambling, that's got to be a huge win and a huge opportunity as well. And I think that's the way we'll see it going.
All right. So as a final question, I'm interested about what are some of the upcoming innovations at Mindway AI that you are most excited about, and how do you think these will transform the gambling industry and, of course, its approach to player protection in the coming years, next 5 years?
Next 5 years again. You like this next 5 years stuff. So, okay, we've got loads of stuff in the R&D pipeline and lots of cool stuff that we're working on. We've also brought some very cool stuff in over the last 12 months or so. Our roadmap is normally driven by customer requirements and what they need. So in the last sort of 12 months, we've seen the intensity model released, which is a short-term model that runs alongside our main longer-term risk score, which is a really cool bit of technology that enables operators to assess the effectiveness on a short-term basis of any incident, actually. But the reason that what we developed it for was assessing the efficacy of interactions. So if you can plot when an interaction has taken place, you obviously want to see control in the player's gambling behavior following that interaction. But for it to impact the risk score, you need to see consistency as well. So we now have the intensity model, which tracks this short-term behavior. So you can have interaction, we see control, okay, we watch and wait, and we don't intervene with this player again unless we see a change in that control. Or interaction, actually we see it's had no effect, okay, what's our next move with this player? So you can constantly be assessing the effectiveness of what you're doing with the customers. That's been huge and welcomed massively by our customers. Again, you could use it to track any event, as I was saying. So you can use that same functionality to understand behavior around special events. So things like cup finals, or if you've got a massive lottery jackpot or something like that. There's a lot of work to be done in how do you factor that in. And also, okay, if somebody's behavior is problematic around that special event, just because it's a special event, how much impact should it have on how you respond to it? So I think there's like loads of work to be done in that space. We are doing a lot of work on the intervention side. And as I mentioned earlier, getting sort of experts to consider what the next course of action they think would be. I think that's really interesting, really exciting. Gosh, the regulatory side of things as well is like hugely important for us. We've got a lot of regulatory conversations on the go and helping sort of drive what direction certain regulators may or may not go in is critical, certainly based on what we discussed earlier around if regulators don't get it right, what impact that can have. We're very keen to be involved in that. So there's loads going on. In terms of how it will shape things, I'm very much of the opinion that the more and better understanding of what is going on with our players is only ever going to feed into increased understanding of what we do as an industry. So long as that is used in a way that is sensible and we understand those behaviors and we build protection in around them, I think it's a driver for innovation. Understanding why people do what they do is only ever going to make our product better, our communication with customers better, and ultimately our player protection better as well.
All right. Thank you so much. Our audience is not just about the iGaming industry. They come from several other niches and probably wondering now if you guys are going to maybe develop some tools for responsible shopping, since it's that period of the year now.
Yeah, I hear you. And if there was a shop scanner, I think I'd be running into a problem myself, especially at the moment. But it's an unusual event, right, Zoltan?
Yeah, that's early intervention and everything can count in that too.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if I've ever told you the story of the origins of Mindway AI, but actually we were a spin out from the University in Aarhus, and the reason that Kim set the business up in the first place is it was kind of in response to a clinical need that had grown out of the responsible gaming clinic that kind of was associated there. At the moment, 100% of what we do is around responsible gambling. We don't work in any other markets, and we don't have sort of other products that exist outside of responsible gaming. Whether that will ever evolve, I don't know, but certainly I'm not aware of any plans that it'll move. And there's still a lot to do in gaming.
Tools will come along. And with AI giving access to cameras in bars and pubs, it will evolve into like responsible drinking, camera watching you, seeing you drink X amount of beers and telling you, okay, you now need to stop now.
I really hope not. I don't want to go down that route as a society. It's that we're back to our nanny state, aren't we? And I think God, we could do another podcast on this, honestly. But I think there's something quite unusual about gambling as an industry and a product. I think when it comes to alcohol, obviously there's the whole drink aware stuff and people wanting to drink responsibly. But I think a much broader proportion of society love drinking alcohol, therefore would never want controls put on it in the way that people look for controls to be put on gambling, because it's like a smaller niche part of the society, and it's come from an environment where people have seen it as like a bad thing to do, potentially. So I don't know if we'd ever get there, because I just think too many people love it too much. But I might be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. All right. So any shout outs at the end to your team, partners?
Oh. Okay, let's do that bit again.
Okay, so now we're at the end, and thank you so much for your time and for our audience. And if you have some shout outs that you would like to give to the team or your partners, now is the time to do it. Now, especially since it's Christmas.
Absolutely. You've got to spread the love at Christmas, don't you? Definitely. So, of course, the whole Mindway AI team are absolute legends, and everybody in our team works so hard with the different roles that we all do. So, huge shout out to the team. Also, the customers. We've got some ace customers. I love the people that I work with. Both existing customers and new ones that we've onboarded this year, which are quite a good few. We have a great community of people that we work with. So, yep, of course, but also our partners, right? Because we work with a lot of other organizations that sort of bring insights into the business and that we offer insights to. And finally, I have the best fun ever at the Hipther event. So I'm going to give you a shout out because I love coming to your event.
All right. Hope our audience also notices this and gets more tickets.
Definitely.
All right.
Come along.
Come along. All right. So thank you once again for your time and for our audience for sticking around. And yeah, we will be back. This is almost the final episode this year. So we will be back next year with season 4, the 4th year of our podcast. And thank you so much for the huge support this year, guys. We reached over 1,500 viewers per episode. So that's awesome for us. Thank you, guys. Take good care.
And that's a wrap for this section of Hipther Talks. Thank you for being a part of our journey today. Don't forget to tune in next week for more insights and discussions. Stay connected with us on Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and more. Until then, keep exploring and keep growing. We'll see you next time.